On Cuba and the United States at the Summits of the Americas. We're joined now by Raul Moas. He is the director of Roots of Hope, a think tank geared towards Cuba-related issues. Growing up in Miami, your parents and grandparents were from Cuba. I've heard you say growing up that you never thought you could ever go to Cuba. So talk to me about what this weekend means for you and for your family, this historic event.
Mike, these are definitely historic times. The Miami community, although at times seen as monolithic, really has a lot of nuance when it comes to how they see these events that are unfolding. For us at Roots of Hope, we see them with a lot of hope. We see the opportunities that come with these changes, and now it's time to test the willingness of the Cuban government in sitting down with its own people, in opening up, in allowing commerce of a private nature, and allowing connection to the internet of a significant form, and seeing how much they're going to do to make sure that their citizens are able to excel in the 21st century.
Your Secretary of State, John Kerry, meeting with his counterpart from Cuba. Of course, the two presidents will meet this weekend as well. What about the expectations? What are people in Miami talking about? What do they hope to come out of all of this?
Cuba is a very polemic issue, very emotional, very personal. At the core, there's a lot of pain in Miami for what has happened in the last 50 years. And it's not just in terms of the material possessions that have been lost, it's the actions of the Cuban government that have repeatedly added insult to injury. And the government continues to repress a country of 11 million people. So Miami wants this to be for the betterment of the people. I think there's a lot of doubt as to the goodwill of the Cuban government. I don't think anyone is under the pretense that Raul Castro is a Democrat, that he's going to open up significant political reforms. We are hopeful, though, that these openings do lead to more personal freedoms for the average person, a better life for the average person, and that then fosters a spirit and ecosystem conducive to change.
Do you think it's possible this weekend? There's been a lot of talk that perhaps it could happen, that the U.S. might remove Cuba from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism.
It certainly sounds like things are moving in that direction. What the U.S. administration will or will not do, something that we're not privy to. Ultimately, what's important here is that if the Cuban government can sit down with its expressly stated archenemy, which is the supposed U.S. empire, as the U.S. is referred to, then they can sit down with their own people. If Raul Castro can shake President Barack Obama's hand at the Summit of the Americas in Panama tonight, tomorrow, then he can sit down, and his government should and can sit down with Cubans on the island to talk about what's best and what's next for their country. So ultimately, we're pushing for recognition of a dialogue between Cubans.
Let me ask you about your organization. Give us its genesis. Why did it come about, and how does it change now that there's this opening up with Cuba? How do you see yourself and your organization changing?
Roots of Hope was founded just over 10 years ago. It was Cuban-American youth who had grown up in Miami for the most part, and had grown up in some ways with the Cuba of yesterday. We had heard our grandparents and parents talking about this Cuba that once was almost a Caribbean Camelot. And it was a mythical place in some ways. Many of our co-founders then studied outside of South Florida and were confronted with a reality that was about Cuba, or a perception on Cuba's reality that was different than their own, and decided, you know what, we need to see this for ourselves. We need to see what Cuba is like today. And in going to Cuba and visiting and connecting with family, with young people in particular, our founders realized that young people in Cuba are the same as young people anywhere. They want to study hard, they want to work hard, they want to provide for their families in a dignified way and leave the next generation better off than they had it. Unfortunately, their system does not allow for that. So we decided as an organization that our focus was going to be on helping young people in Cuba realize their potential. And our focus for the last 10 years has been in realizing that mission through technology and entrepreneurship. Our hope is that a lot of what is being discussed in these last few months will help deepen the impact we have in the lives of young people. A lot of what the U.S. administration has done has been in the areas of travel, technology, and private enterprise. And so we're looking forward to collaborating with our partners in Cuba, young Cubans, in a non-political fashion, simply to help them better their realities.
You talked about the Cuba of yesterday. You obviously also talking about the Cuba of today, the realities. How do you envision the Cuba of tomorrow?
Our hope at Roots of Hope has always been to see a Cuba where young people can really, truly author their own futures. In terms of what political system Cuba has, what sort of economic model they follow, how their healthcare system or education system looks like, that's not for us to decide. That is for young people in Cuba to shape and mold in whatever manner they prefer. Our desire and what we work towards is a Cuba where young people can come together, they can express themselves freely without fear of repression. It's a Cuba where a young person does not have to decide whether or not to stay or leave. It's a Cuba where a young person does not have to throw themselves to the seas in search of a better future, where a young person can build a dignified life for themselves and their family on the island, they can express themselves freely, and they can contribute to building a better Cuba today.
All right.